Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. So let's move on to the third and final item today, which is Yelp v. Google. Yelp sued Google for antitrust violations of unfair business practices in California. I think it's a federal action, but they're also invoking state law in this particular case, which you can do in where there's a federal claim as well. So Mike, tell us about what your thoughts are here.
It's a particularly interesting case for me on multiple levels because Yelp has always been the, bad boy that everybody hates. It's easy; they're an easy company to hate, but obviously Google is sort of moving into their company fairly rapidly, and this case brings up a lot of interesting points. And what's fascinating to me, or what I am looking forward to, particularly in this case, is discovery in a public. Showing discovery results with public filings and in the courtroom. But so I was curious, how should I tampen my expectations, or when is this going to happen? So I started doing some research into the case, and firstly, it's in front of a Susan Van Keulen, who is a magistrate judge, which means that she's a judge who has not been appointed by the federal authorities. She was hired to sort of fill in when there's a high caseload. And because she's not been appointed by federal authorities, both parties have a right to request a federally appointed judge. And turns out that this judge has fined Google in the past. So there's a reasonably good chance that they will look to get rid of her and put a different judge in. But then you go into this sort of roulette system. You get one of the 9 court judges. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see whether they do that. But then I was curious, well, how long is this going to take? And the best sort of matched case of this is the Epic Games case against Google, which was first filed in, I think, August of 2020. And it didn't come till trial till November 23. The trial was only a week long. And they are still in the now they're in the penalty phase, which is another year. So, I mean, that has been going on for 4 years. It took 3 years to get to the juicy details. And so that sort of provides sort of a framework for people to understand. I mean, there's a lot that goes on. I mean, Google is going to file motions to dismiss. It appears from everybody I can talk to and that there's enough questions of fact that need to be determined. It's not that Google won't be able to get it dismissed.
Yeah, they won't get it dismissed.
This is already. I'm sorry.
They won't. They will not successfully dismiss the case.
That's correct. And there are claims that are made by Google publicly that this stuff has already been litigated. But when I investigated that, some of this question came up in the DOJ case, and the judge refused to include it in the case, but not because it wasn't important, but it was because it didn't relate to general search. It was about these vertical search engines, and he felt that was distinct from general search. And so in some ways, the fact that was kicked out of the DOJ case is in Yelp's favor, not against Google. So there's that. Google's going to, say that. And then there's all the legal filings, discovery from all these experts, private discovery, and then finally to trial. So it could be anywhere from 18 months to 36 before we get a trial. And then beyond that, another year to get penalties. And then once penalties, there's a whole nother appeal process. So resolution could be out 5 years. So my sort of excitement to see the data that comes out of this, which I think is going to be incredibly interesting, because Google's going to have to prove that this isn't
a lot of local search, right? Yeah, there's going to be a lot of local search data.
There's going to be a ton of local search data that I am so looking forward to. I hope I don't die first. That's all I can say.
Oh my God! Well,
we hope not either.
Yeah, stay on that bike, Mike.
I also wonder, we haven't, to my knowledge, we haven't really seen a similar case in the EU, despite their introduction of the Digital Markets Act. And you wonder how much of this data actually might inform a similar DMA, either at the state level in California, which has been rumored, or potentially nationwide. Who knows? I think that we're still years away from that. But I think that the data that comes out of this case, I think, could be a really interesting benchmark and provide a lot more sort of transparent framework upon which to build a a law like the DMA. So.
And in terms of the DMA, it would help the DMA define local as a vertical search that would then fall under their auspices and could be regulated, which we saw Google made every effort to avoid that in their initial conversation. Now, in Spain, where Booking has been declared a monopoly and was fined 50 million, 60 million euros, there are a number of cases that are starting to bubble to the surface where they're being sued for penalties. So I think you will I think the declaration of misused monopoly by the state creates more room for private suits like this. So we'll see.
Well, I mean, in terms of the vertical analysis, that's been the framework that the EU has tended to look at these abuse of market position cases through, and local is not really a vertical because it spans so many categories. It's not really a vertical, but it should be addressed because it's arguably the most important single thing if we can lump it together. Because of its impact on scores of businesses, economic activity, et cetera. So it's really important category.
It's sort of an aggregation of verticals, as we've seen in our research. It is an infinite number of verticals.
Well, it's. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, I think that you almost look to Google for how Google would define what local is, and to me, it's any category where a reasonable percentage of search results contain local pack or Google business profiles. I mean, clearly the intent behind queries, Google has a better picture of than anyone else. And so I think that this is why, to me, it's a little bit confusing that hotels are sort of separated out in the EU, because Google is clearly considering them to be very tightly related, if not sort of an completely overlapping Venn diagram.
Although because of the potential ad revenue, they broke it into its own sort of unique.
Well, that's how they organize their teams internally. Is vertically. So I think.
Right. I mean, Yelp contends that local uses a unique algorithm. The Google, it uses unique data set. It serves unique searcher need, and therefore is a unique market both for search and for advertising. So it's not necessarily a vertical, but it is a market.
Well, I mean,
all I'm saying is I think hotels fall under that exact same,
true.
The algorithm and the data sets are largely similar. So
hotels is an interesting and maybe arguably unique category because the transaction now most of the hotel booking transactions happen offline or online, right? Through some e-commerce like experience, a shopping cart and so on and so forth. But the intent behind the search is a local intent. It may not be near me now, it's where I'm going to, but it is a physical place that you are going to patronize, and the fulfillment is in the real world. If we look at, I advocated in the past that the way you think about local search is where does the fulfillment happen, right? Where is the service rendered, or where is the activity principally taking place? And if we look at it through that lens, then most of what goes on the internet, I mean, you can divide it into e-commerce and then everything else is local, right? So, I mean, in the retail context, e-commerce is still up. Some people say it's 20% in the US. It's still a minority use case, and across the world, that's even going to be more true. So, most of what's happening on the internet that's not entertainment or information that's transactional is going to be local. It's a massive category in terms of economic impact, and should be addressed. But it's squirrely and problematic because it doesn't fit into these nice, neat little industry-based kinds of buckets. It's an amalgamation, as you say, of all of them in some ways. Anyway, anything more to say about Yelp v. Google?
Nope.
Yeah, it's going to be great information, but that'll only come out if there's a trial. I think that in the form of trial exhibits, all the discovery that happens is going to be non-public, unless there's a motion that appends some document or something. But we have to get to trial in order to get access to that. So we got to hope that it goes to trial. And so,
all right.
Anyway, all right. Well, thanks for joining us again. Tell your friends, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.